Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here, talking about Jayden Daniels' performance. Jayden was definitely more leveraged in this game as the running game was not nearly as effective. Also, you're just leveraged as, hey, those guys over there wearing purple, really good. Lots of challenges, lots of guys that you got to be aware of. The Roquan Smiths, the Kyle Hamiltons, Marlon Humphreys. You got dudes that got all kinds of awards over on that side of the football. Ultimately, Logan, how do you think he played in what might have been his most difficult game as a pro?
Hey, I mean, I think he did a great job. I think, if we're being nitpicky, I already mentioned kind of some of that run game stuff early, because in addition to the GT, which would have been a touchdown, they had a quarterback draw where he could have thrown the bubble to OZ or run the draw. And the draw, man, is so open, and a man of his rushing ability is going to score. Then obviously that's the first drive, so that's instead of 3, it's 7, whatever, and you can kind of nitpick that. But I think after that, kind of early, it was probably the first 2 drives, you're kind of like, oh, what's going on? But I think he settled in and just did an excellent job. And we talked about some of the stuff Cliff did to help him out with some of those kind of trick, kind of screen, explosive opportunities, which are great. But I thought he did a great job on the Terry touchdown of reading that out, throwing with great anticipation. I thought he maybe the best throw of the year for him to Zach Ertz on the 3rd and 10 in the red zone, where it's like a little pull concept. And Roquan Smith is like right in the throwing lane, but you throw that sucker with a kind of a, what is that, like a 3 o'clock arm angle to get around the pressure of the guard. And it was just just a tremendous throw over the middle of the field, seeing the middle of the field, great anticipation. And obviously the explosive plays down the field on the sail concepts, the deep crossers, sitting in the pocket. There's free runners sometimes. I just thought he showed a lot of maturity, as a passer. And I know we've seen that element of that, but I feel like he just took a next step. And there's always been kind of, he did a good job, but and in this game, it was kind of all on him. And I thought he just did an excellent job executing. And then the accuracy, the comeback to Noah Brown, where that ball is placed like right where Noah Brown can get a great catch by Noah Brown. The comeback or the hitch, to Terry, where it's right in that spot. The way he kind of floated that ball out to Terry for the touchdown. Great job by Terry catching that football on that kind of slant and go. There were so many good throws, so many high leverage plays. That was a 4th down, the 3rd and 10 to Zach, and he just sits in there. And got to give credit to the offensive line. I thought they did a great job in more obvious passing situations. We talked about how Cliff helped them out with some of the protection plan, which was awesome to see, but they have to execute it. And then the receivers did a great job executing. I do think the one thing that kind of stuck out to me when comparing, obviously Baltimore's defense to the Commanders' defense is there were a lot of plays where there was not a lot of air in the secondary. It's just tight. Hard throws. And so that's something where you kind of say, hey, if you have another like stud wideout or another guy that can really create separation versus man-to-man coverage, this is probably a little bit easier. But I will say, like we talked about Zach a little bit too, Zach, his ability to run routes and stem guys up. He had we mentioned the sail route already, but he had a deep kind of post dig that gets covered up early in the game when Noah Brown runs it, or when Diami runs it, excuse me. But he runs up, pushes vertical, gets the guy to open his hips, then comes across and ends up being a great, big explosive play for the offense. So I was really impressed. Obviously, there was some limitations, like I said, early in the game with some of the run decision making. But as a passer and as a competitor, I thought, man, he was just really locked in, and maybe one of his best performances of the year so far. And I think when you listen to people in the national media, I think they would also agree with that.
Yeah, no doubt. People want to see him throw over the middle of the field more throughout the season. He does that. He's 7 of 9 in the middle third of the field in this game. And you mentioned the separation. I'm trying to pull this up real quick. Next Gen Stats Game Center is loading for me. But the separation for Terry was on average, I think it was 1.6 yards of separation.
Yeah, that
is tight. That is not necessarily great for Terry McLaurin. 1.64 is the number. And yet he was able to find him in key situations. And that's something that we've wished quarterbacks would do for years and say, like, look, Terry's a good contested catcher. So, like, throw him, and not just like 50-50 jump ball situations. Like, if you throw it a tight window on a hitch, he'll use his body, and he's a body catcher, and he'll shield off the defender, and he'll come down with it. And for years, it's like, just throw the ball to Terry. He'll make it happen. And Jayden does that. And for Terry, he had kind of a weird day in that he only had 6 catches for like 50 yards. Obviously, he's got 2 touchdowns, which are pretty impactful. But I would have sworn he had like 8 catches for $140, because that's the kind of impact that he had in the game. But then you got Zach, 4+ yards of separation. So good day for him on the old route running department. But he just finds ways, and hopefully these guys can continue to get better. But I think Jayden's decision making was so good, because there's even times where I'm like, that is the only option. That is the only answer for him in this thing. And then Baltimore does a good job of rallying and tackling. There's one play where like Kyle Hamilton comes scotch free on a blitz and he lofts it over to Austin Eckler. And some of the previous weeks, like, that's become a 40-yard game because, guys, in a blitz situation, they don't have the bodies behind, and Eckler makes one guy miss, and all of a sudden he's out. Baltimore rallies and tackles for a gain of 2 yards, but it's the right decision by Jayden. And I think that ability to quickly decipher things and show off, I guess is a good way to put it, his processing speed just gives you so much hope for what he really is moving forward, that this hasn't been some kind of product of bad defenses making it easy on him. No, even against a great defense in Baltimore, he is making excellent decisions, and then the accuracy, and I think his way to see the game, the combination of those two things, right? Like, I process not only where the ball needs to go from this receiver to that receiver, but like, I can put it on the correct shoulder. I can put it down in a way. Like, he just has almost like a supernatural way of seeing the game to know exactly what's supposed to happen and the physical abilities to make it happen. And that is rare, special, and was on full display in this game. Again, even though they ultimately wind up with the loss.
No, I agree. And I think, obviously he wasn't perfect. There was a couple times where I'm like, oh, like, step into that throw, deliver the ball. But I think on the whole, we saw a really nice, development of him, and kind of maturity. And especially, again, in that first half was a little bit clunky at times. I think there was a check down to Ozzie where he kind of opens his hips and throws it, and it's a little bit fluttery and kind of short. He catches the ball, but you're like, oh, that could have been a bigger gain if you get the ball out there. But those plays are going to happen. Those plays are going to happen. Right. But I think it's the other stuff, the high level stuff that we've seen that's really cool. And I was just thinking about it. I think it was their what was it? It was their third drive of the game where he throws that ball to Ozzie, and Ozzie, ends up dropping the football on 2nd and 10. But that's a first down. There's another example where good process, tight, and the tightness of the windows, I think, was the other thing that was impressive. It's just like he's kind of layering them. They're NFL throws, and I think that's something that that really stuck out to me, is just his ability to kind of say, hey, I can do this. I don't need to be running around. I don't need to be scrambling. I don't need to have the quarterback run stuff necessarily. And while that stuff's helpful, like, I thought this was a really good example of some of the higher level processing. And is there room for improvement? 100%. But I think this to me was
the sixth game. I'd hope so.
Yeah, this was a big step for me in terms of just watching the film and just being like, oh, this is big time stuff.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about is, are there some kind of variations on route concepts you are familiar to that are bent to the talent of this team? What I mean by that is this. Romo talked a lot on the broadcast about certain situations, alignments, whatever it is. We're like, oh, expect the slant here, and then they throw a hitch. Mm-hmm. And Cliff talks a lot about players, not plays. And you see that in big situations. It's like, okay, let's get the ball to Terry here. Let's give Jayden the throw that he wants. And we know that he is very, very fond of throwing hitches and goes because he did it a ton in college. Like, he's very, very good at throwing them. We see some of the arm angles and some of the ball placement on those versus some of the slants, which have to come in traffic, and maybe they're not as easy to win for the wide receivers. But in the West Coast systems or some of the other systems around the league, or whatever Romo seemed to be familiar with, like, those concepts have slants, and instead Cliff just changes the isolated route to a go or to a hitch. Are you seeing some of that where Cliff is bending this offense to Jayden's skill set, and he's making Cliff, I won't say right, but like rewarding Cliff for those decisions?
I don't know if I've seen any concepts where I've been like, oh, this is something that I've never seen before. Like the isolated hitch. Like, for example, like when I was with Kyle, Sean, you name your OC, like this is very common. You get 3-by-1 away, right? And it's a quick game concept. So like stick, lion, dragon, whatever you want to call over there to the left where the 3 receivers are. The backside player usually has an isolation hitch. And what you'd call that is like a thunder. So if it's free access, you run a 5-yard stop. If it's press, you run an 8-yard stop. If it's cover 2, you get in the, you know what I'm saying? Like they want to kind of, or you signal that guy. And so I think like you've seen a little bit of that, like Cliff does that more, right? He says, oh, I want to get away, give the quarterback a nice isolation read there. I think you see a lot of what I would call spin, so like double in, or second end is what some people call it. So Zach will run the first one, Terry will run the second one, and I've been in a lot of offenses, and we don't run as much spin as this team does because I think Jayden likes the matchup of Zach Ertz on that first spin, and he's hit him a couple times on it. So you're going to call that more because he likes it, right? And he feels comfortable with it. I think the play action comeback is something everyone in the league runs, but I think when they need a play action shot or kind of get on base kind of completion, that's something Cliff calls. Like last week against Cleveland, they called it. It was their first kind of big chunk to Terry on the left side, or not big chunk because they had but like in terms of play action shot, that was their first one. They ran it. They tried to run it this week to Noah Brown. Noah Brown gets covered up, but they like that quite a bit. That shows up a lot. So I do think they have plays that Jayden likes and feels comfortable with. In terms of quick game, holy cow, man. If they need a play and it's 2nd and 5, they're going to run spot like 9 out of 10 times. So spot is just a little flare and then like a 5-yard sit. And I think those are plays you start seeing guys like really gravitate to and really understand and like really own. And I think that's been kind of cool to watch is the ownership that they've taken with that. But, you know, I've run those plays. It's just this team seems to like them more and be more ready to execute them than other places I've been.
Last question on Jayden. The quarterback run game was not effective for the first time, and he couldn't scramble for the first time. Like, there's just not a big rushing number next to his name for the first time as a pro. Was it purely what Baltimore did? Like, how did they shut that element of Jayden's game down?
Well, like I said already, I think one of the things is when you're doing the quarterback run stuff, you got to make good decisions, especially when there's a zone read element to it, right? We're running read GT when we're running, when I have the option to run a quarterback draw and there's a bubble over here, I got to make sure that my number count's correct and I got to trust what I see. And I felt like he didn't make the correct decisions on a couple of those things. Obviously, they run the quarterback, what I would call truck, like where you're pulling guys to the perimeter and he's running in the low red, which has been great for us. And I think one of the things Baltimore just played that well. They're a fast defense. They're going to cut up angles. They're going to fit blocks better. They're a better defense. They're going to do that stuff better. And they did. And so then obviously, like when it's time to scramble for Jayden Daniels, I think the other thing is they rush with good integrity. They're fast on the defensive end position. They'd kind of have like a pseudo spy in there sometimes. Obviously, there's a couple times where Roquan's right there. And that was it. And the other thing is I felt like early on some of those like 2-minute situations, the first couple of drives in the third quarter, like he's throwing with confidence. And so he's not even getting the opportunity to scramble. So I think that was another thing that really showed up for me is the total number of scramble opportunities was limited by what they were doing defensively. But I also thought Jayden, because of how he was throwing the football, didn't need to do it as much. And I think that's all good. And I think if there's one thing I'd say, hey, Jayden, like, let's make sure we really dial in this week. And I look at me sitting in my office talking about what I would tell Jayden Daniels is like, let's just clean up the read stuff when we're doing it in the run. Like that's the only thing I would say, just to make those plays a little bit more efficient for us, because it's going to help him in the long run be more efficient as a runner. It's going to help the offense be more efficient. But again, that's 5 plays that happened in the first quarter. And maybe that's him just settling in. Who knows? But that would be the only criticism I'd levy here. And the only thing I think that would even provided an opportunity for this offense to slow down. Because outside of that, I think, again, like he threw the ball well, and there just weren't a ton of scramble opportunities.
Yeah, there weren't a ton of misses. Just a couple happened in big spots like that. The drop for OZ, who's been really consistent this year. Like, he's a human being. This happens, and so there's a couple plays like that. Guys miss a block. Guys drop a ball. Jayden has the one overthrow to Noah, which is like the one time he got out to his right, he overthrows, and probably lucky that ball's not picked. But like that's the right decision, and so just a little higher level of execution, and you're right there. And of course, if you don't have to score as many points, so with that, let's talk about the defense.